Welcome everybody to Drive to Win. I'm Justin Bell, your host, and as always, I'm here in the beautiful SiriusXM studios at the Wynn Las Vegas. Well, my guest this week is very timely because there are so many wild conspiracy theories, so much strategy questions, all from this last weekend in Qatar, that I thought I had to bring back the only human I know that can decipher it all and deliver it in a way that will make sense. And of course, that is Ruth Buscombe. She will be joining me in a few minutes right there. Well, how did you enjoy that weekend then? For me, the world went upside down in the wildest way, in a way that I didn't expect. Now, like you, I sat and watched the sprint race on Saturday with I just thought it was blinking boring, actually. I'm interested to know what Ruth thinks about it, but I was just sitting there just going, I just don't think the cars look fast on the track, even though I know it's mind-blowingly fast, 5G through those high-speed sequence of corners. The drivers seem to love it, but it doesn't translate for me in terms of a visual spectacle, especially when during the race they back down the speed a bit to make the tires work. And I just thought it had me a bit worried for the race. And obviously the result was Piastri, then Russell, then Norris, and then Max. And I was thinking, please make the rest of the weekend more exciting. And I got what I wished for. Now, from Oscar Piastri's point of view, it was exemplary. He got pole. He then won the race. He controlled it from the front, a sprint race I'm talking about. And that was an indication for him, a vindication, if you like, that he is back. He's had a disaster, hasn't been on the podium for 5 races in a row. And he gets here and it is going exactly as he needed. The question is, too little, too late? I guess we will find out. But then the race, it was a good start. There was nothing dramatic about the start. Everyone sort of jostled around a bit, nice and clean. And I was thinking, Oscar's just going to tear off into the distance. And from his point of view, it is going to be a textbook execution of a weekend. And then suddenly, we have this situation that went upside down with the safety car, and it all turned into a bit of a fiasco. McLaren made absolutely the wrong call. It put them on the back foot throughout the rest of the race. Max Verstappen sitting in his car out front. He knew the race was coming his way at that point, and he was incredulous, actually, at the decision McLaren had made. And it led to him winning. His 70th win, his 70th career win, 7th of the year. It was just spectacular. And so with Oscar lying second, Carlos Sainz third, he was really having a party of his own. He should have been celebrating like he'd won the championship, because for them to have, a couple of podiums this year, it's quite incredible for Carlos Sainz in his second phase of his career, running with Williams. And he must look across at Ferrari and go, I think I made the right decision there. So it was just so good for me to see that top 3. But of course, with Max now only 12 points behind Lando in the championship, it is legitimately a three-way fight going into the final race of the year in Abu Dhabi. And there's so much to talk about, so much to unpack. I can't wait to get Ruth in here to get her deep insight on everything that went on. Well, we've talked so much about Yuki Tsunoda when he got the drive promoted, when Liam Lawson got demoted from the full Red Bull squad to the Racing Bulls team, in what seemed, it's funny, a disaster for him at the time. And I remember saying incorrectly, I'll own it, it's the end of his Formula One career. Well, he didn't, did it? He actually had a cracking season. Red Bulls was where it really came together for him. Racing Bulls was where it really came together for him. And he's put himself firmly on the map. Whereas Yuki, who is, let's not forget, by being in Formula One, by being in the Red Bull system, he has proven himself throughout the junior categories that he is a force to be reckoned with, a little package of power. But being Max Verstappen's teammate, with the way their car is to drive, it's a poison chalice, and it definitely tainted his wine, so to speak. And he has not had the season that you'd think, although this weekend was maybe the best he'd ever had, out qualifying Max. Wild. And doing his job and pulling over. But the news which came out as we're taping this is that Isack Hadjar will become Max Verstappen's new teammate for 2026 and beyond. And I love that. I think Isack has the mentality to deal with being in that second seat alongside literally the best driver in the world right now, dealing with all the variables that involves understanding to drive a car like Max drives. Well, hopefully he'll be part of the development of that car over the winter. He will be in the preseason testing, unlike Yuki this year. So I think there's so much to play for Isack, and I think he's the right guy to be in that seat moving into next year. Of course, that means that Liam Lawson, is retaining his seat at Racing Bulls. Was Yuki going to end up there? But no, I think the right decision has been made that Liam deserves that second seat. And the highly rated British 18-year-old Arvid Lindblad is going to be promoted to an F1 seat at Racing Bulls. How amazing is that? Another 18-year-old coming into the sport. I don't know much about the kid. I guess we'll put a lot of research in between now and the first race of the season. His life will become public knowledge. But what an amazing moment that is for him. Just imagine on a personal level how his family, his supporters, his backers will be celebrating an incredible moment in time for him. So Racing Bulls following along Mercedes' path in really promoting one of their true juniors into a full-time Formula One seat. I don't think Yuki's going anywhere long-term outside Formula One. He'll be part of driving the old cars and developing those, part of that testing program of the old cars. So I think with his Honda connection, you're not really going to miss out too much on that. Just a little fun thing before we go into the whole conversation with Ruth, because I want to give her as much time as we can. Did you catch George and Lando in the media pen? I still don't know what that was really all about. It was about, was he blocking? Did he not help out? But it was, all I could hear was Lando saying, I can't believe that you took their word over mine. And then he's like, oh, disappointing. And George was like, I was just trying to give you a tow to help you win a world championship. And I thought it was a very inappropriate, badly timed, intimate moment that shows how close these drivers are. They're young guys that spend a lot of time on the road together. These guys play paddle together. They really are good mates. But the pressure points of Formula One mean that in that moment it sort of all came out. And it was just very human. And I thought you could imagine their PR reps going, guys, not here. It's like the kids squabbling in front of the world media. And I think it just indicates it's the end of a long season. There's fatigue from the travel. There's fatigue from the pressure. And while they're best friends on track, on track, it's life or death, isn't it? So they've like each other. They've given so much to be in Formula One. And I just thought it was a fun, intimate moment. So check it out on social media if you haven't. Well, Ruth Buscombe, as always, she is the voice of reason, a former Ferrari F1 strategist, so she knows how that goes. Now works with F1TV as one of their lead analysts, and her social media post, guys, about if you don't follow her weekly newsletter, please sign up for it on Instagram. She brings all the gossip to what happens in the Formula One races and the paddock and the pits and breaks it down in a way like no one else can. So Ruth, once again, joining us. I mean, in a minute, I think she's on the show so often, she's going to actually end up taking my seat. But for now, she's sitting over there. Ruth, thank you so much for joining the show again. Well, that's enough of all my thoughts. Let's bring in our show regular. In fact, she's such a regular, I might have to give her my seat sometime soon. Ruth Buscombe, former Ferrari F1 strategist, is back in the studio. Ruth, so nice to see you again.
So nice to see you again. It's like I never left. This is my second home now. I'm coming for the seat next season.
Well, yeah, and I'll sit over there. But you literally were here 10 days ago. But what a lot has happened in 10 days.
I know. This season just keeps giving, doesn't it? And we go into the final race, the first three-way decider in 15 years, all to play for. It's still on. I love it.
Well, what I love is Ruth actually sent me a text yesterday morning going, oh my God, we got so much to talk about. And I'm like, yes, we do. Autosport said it so well yesterday. How did McLaren manage to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory? I mean, that really should be the title of the end of this season, shouldn't it?
Yeah. So when I was at Ferrari, a wise man, Rory Byrne, one of the greatest designers of all time, said to me that a lot of the times when you lose a championship when you should win it, or you lose races when you should win them, is because you're so afraid to lose, you forget how to win. And I think that is exactly what happened.
So you think, when do you think that started to ratchet up, though?
It's really interesting. Like, I think, as early as there was that chat between Ted and Oscar in Barcelona, where they were saying, this is what Red Bull's plan is. Christian came out, obviously now he's no longer with the team, but, and said, as long as we're in touching season by Singapore, we know we can be strong at the last end of the races. Zach described, Max as the guy in the horror show that's like, that's jumping out. And then Max just called himself, said, you can call me Chucky. Like it's just great, isn't it? And it's a great story when I think about all of my favorite championships in Formula One, having, kind of been a Formula One fan my entire life since I was a kid. You remember these seasons where, the twists and the turns, you can't call it, you feel like you definitely can call it, then everything changes, that disqualification in Las Vegas. It did stop me from getting to Delilah for my chicken tenders in the win after, but it was great for the story, so I'll allow it for the fact that the championship went on. And I got my chicken tenders in the end, so that's fine.
I know, I saw you heading down there, all sparkly. But let's look at that. You said, like, story. You were involved in the F1 movie, and there were some magical moments in that script, but that I'm sure you still went, could happen, not likely, but good for a film. If you had put this end of season, the last 8
Keyboard
races,
warriors would be out, wouldn't they? They'd be like, that's unrealistic.
It's so unrealistic. And like we said before the show, just walking in the studio, is, 5 races ago, it was like, he's so far back. I mean, it's theoretically possible. And then the next race, but it's even more theoretically a little more possible. And now we're on the cusp. And yeah, it is still in Lando's hands to win, but there's so much to unpack. And there was a great Instagram meme. I love the internet for that, is that they put all Max's quotes together on some account. And it's just, he's just merciless. He everything they ask him, where they're trying to get inside his sensitive brain, or do you care about the other guys? Or he's like, no, I just want to win. And someone said something like, so, do you worry about losing? And he goes, I've never thought about losing. He just thinks about winning. How much of where we are right now is just that attitude of his?
I think we've seen this evolution of Max. He's always been this sublime talent, right? But he's a very different Max to the Max he was when he burst on the scene in 2015, again, 2016, 2018, where he had the raw speed, but maybe not the consistency, maybe not the ability to kind of, control his emotions, which when he can do, he can use so effectively. And that's old school superpower stuff, is F1. And I think you saw 2021, the racing between Max, at his peak prime, Lewis at his peak prime, like that season, I think you really saw him kind of being, say they're kind of like forged in the crucible of a championship. I think ever since, he won that first championship, you could see, there was this weight lifted off of him, which we've seen with so many drivers. Once you get your first win, your first pole, your first season, you come back a different human being. You're forever changed. And so for me, I think Max he is unflappable, now 99% of the time. He said himself, it was that one contact he had earlier in the year that he said, that's the mistake I made this year. Ownership again of mistakes, not dwelling in it, but recognizing it. And I think you've got to give the credit to Red Bull as well, because they are just hilariously relentless. I love, the kind of almost to at a point of craziness, like the amount that they've just gone for it. Like the race fans, the sensible tire is a medium. We'll fit a soft. They just threw the absolutely kitchen sink at winning, and it's been an absolute pleasure to see it. The guys in Red Bull are lovely. Guys and girls in Red Bull are lovely. Like Mekis has been brilliant, and it's been great telling him, I think you're going to win, and then him actually coming on the post show and going, you did tell me you were going to win as well. It's like, well, when you look at it, you take a step back, you just see this championship mindset. Every single person in Red Bull right now looks like they're operating to try to win this championship. They even updated their bio header after McLaren, DNF in Vegas too. It's still on. It's absolute unrelentless passion and fire. And, if they don't win, I think every single individual in that team, the factory and at the track, can say we gave it everything, which is all you can really do in sport, right?
I make no apologies that we're going to keep coming back to this fight and we where we are right now, because there's still so much more to discuss from it. But I started off the weekend. You were at home. You were moving, so you were not at the track, which I don't know, probably allows you to have a different perspective because I know you're still getting a lot of data. I'm sure you got access to all your AWS data, the same stuff, right, that you do at the track, but maybe with a little more time to digest it because you're not talking to fans and media. The first race, the sprint race, and we forget it was a sprint weekend, and you're sitting there and I'm going, this could be the most dull race of the year. I mean, and what an anticlimax. And one of my criticisms of these super tracks is, I know the drivers love it, 5G through those fast corners and all that. But one of my friends who used to work with me on all the IMSA stuff is a camera guy. And he said, the problem is they have these whapping great long lenses on. They're 500 feet from the cars. And the cars coming towards you honestly look like I'm in Ralph's parking lot coming towards, there's only snaps when those cars look quick. There's something about that track. They're going fast, but in the race, they back off so much time, don't they? Like in the sprint, even 3 or 4, 5 seconds, that those cars lose that energy and dynamism, if you like. And I thought, oh God, this is going to be so dull. And I was just...
It's because you're driving, not a strategist. I was like, this is going to be spicy. I'm incredibly selfish, terribly unreliable narrator. Yeah. But I loved in 2023 in Qatar, the opportunity that the 18 limit stint maximation that we had in that race that basically forced it to a 3-stop that got announced in the morning gave me as a strategist to be a narcissistic main character for the day. So I was loving this race weekend because, it's nice, you go to some tracks where it is all down to the driver, like there's very little, you can make it worse, but you can very rarely make it better as a strategist. And then you have other opportunities, where you can really work together with your driver, like rain races are a great example where everything needs to go right. Pit stops, execution, reliability, performance, driving and strategy. And then you get kind of weird ones like the Qatar 2025 Grand Prix, where, the qualifying obviously is absolutely down to, kind of meticulous.
Was that how you expected it to pan out, qualifying?
Well, you should have read my newsletter because I did predict the pit laps.
You actually did. I know you did. But so let's pick that up. Before the start of the race, that morning, Pirelli said don't go over the 25 lap maximum on their tires, which actually is such a leveler across the field, right? It stops Carlos Sainz being able to run 41 laps or something on, on soft mediums like he did, not long ago. You've got this leveler across the field, but also a direct indicator for all of yous, strategists sitting up and down the pit lane, to know that everybody's going to have to act within that window. That's a variable that's taken off the table that in your world is like an absolute.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I don't think I'd like every race like this, but getting one every now and again is really interesting because people aren't used to it. Actually, I learned quite a lot from, the 2023 race we did here, which had the same limits. And sitting back down, I remember dread to say how many years I've been doing strategy by 2023, and you kind of get used to races. I remember I spent 4 hours sat down after they did the rules like I was a rookie strategist, going through absolutely every single way in which the race could pan out. And my former boss Chevy won't mind me saying this, but we had so many arguments where I was like, no, it's gonna be like this, and it was just through kind of hard work, and we ended up doing the equivalent of the Max and Red Bull strategy most of the cars did with Valtteri Bottas, which was really, worked out. And then we did the exact opposite because in my head, I could see it panning out as being a race of extremes. You can't overtake really at all in Qatar unless someone lets you through or you make a mistake. It's really difficult to overtake. So it becomes about going from point A to point B as fast as you can whilst dodging the things that lose you time. But the difference between a race like this is you can box behind someone that's very, very slow if you know they're going to come in 2 laps time because you know how long they're going to last for. Actually, American racing is a great example when you think about IndyCar, IMSA is a lot more like that, where you're kind of energy limited, where you can calculate the maximum amount or the earliest amount people can go. And that enables you to kind of piece through this fine thread. And I believe that's why so many teams other than McLaren opted to go for that kind of strategy, which is basically, it seems counterintuitive to give up flexibility, but actually getting eaten by the blinds, to use a term, is worse because it's the flexibility to lock in a great position. P1 flexibility. I'll take P1.
Yeah.
And there's so few other examples. you really needed another safety car
Well, they
to
were
effectively, save the thing, which is why, same way that we approached it in 2023. We had Valtteri box on the first lap possible, lap 3, under a safety car, and we had Joe box on the last lap possible, lap 18. So as a team with a much slower car and much less to play for, we basically covered the two extremes of the safety car window. So, it's a bit like, when you're down in the casino, you have two risky strategies that you're covering off them in the middle, you can end up covering it. So I think there's various different approaches that work. Obviously, with the safety car coming out on lap 7, I couldn't believe they didn't come in.
Well, let's go through that. Because that is, I know everybody listening to this is following your train of thought, saying, well, Ruth's super smart, and there's super smart men and women all the way up and down the pit lane, doing the same thing, knowing the information. And there we are. Obviously, we had Oscar, Lando, Max at the start. It was a good start. It was clean. And I like that. I didn't want it to be taken out by accident, right? You didn't want this to be clashes to determine the championship going into the last race. And then we have the Gasly and Hülkenberg collision. That comes out. You know what's happening to your peers up and down the pit lane. And the minute McLaren didn't come in and Max did, even me, who's a Neanderthal sitting on the sofa, went, they all have the same information. And Zach was saying, yeah, but we just didn't think everybody else was going to stay out. That's so naive. And don't you have an alternative, especially at the beginning of the race? If it happens on lap 3, we do that. If it happens on lap 4, if Max comes in or Max doesn't come in, don't you go through every single permutation variable on that?
Different teams approach it different ways, but I would say I'm probably in the majority given what we saw.
Yeah.
In that's exactly what we did. We would decide, and especially actually in some ways it's quote unquote easier to do it on a race like Qatar because there's so few options left. When you look at the stint limit, there isn't actually that many laps that you can box in. And the thing you have to remember is that, it's 26 seconds for a pit stop. When you box under a safety car, you then squish back up again. So effectively, you're getting 26 seconds. So the only reason you want to stay out is because you think by staying out and keeping the lead of the race or inheriting the lead of the race if you're further behind, I can get 26 seconds more than I can do where I am right now. The other thing you need to remember is effectively, if you're looking at it from a strategy logic position, the car that's running last on the track, always has a free pit stop because they're not going to give up any positions to anybody. The car that's second last, if they know that the car that's last is taking the pit stop, they also have a free pit stop and they will just come out in front of them. And you can go all the way back up. Now, the only extra complication is that we have 10 teams and 10 grid boxes. So if you're right next to your teammate, you might have to queue. And depending on where you are in the pit lane, if you're first, you've got a lovely shot in, a lovely shot out. So actually, McLaren have got quite a good advantage. If you're someone like Mercedes, for example, that's a bit further back because they go in old championship order from the previous season, with the way we have kind of right-of-way rules of the way that you can get out, you can lose a position. But you have to factor this all in. And we have calculations, we do all the numbers to work out the risk versus reward. So we're talking about all of this. But the thing that's super interesting about that is the fact that McLaren must have assumed that no one was going to come in, or at least none of the protagonists were going to come in with such a level of confidence, because if you are not sure, you split the cars from a purely logical perspective. Now let's put in the human one, which is the further up you are, the more price you pay for getting it wrong. Because if I'm deadpan last and I box, I'll be back where I was. And even if I got it wrong, the only thing I've done is move my tires to a different compound or a different set. If I'm first and I box and everybody else stays out, and then maybe there's, 17 cars still running at the time, I've given up 17 positions and I've got it wrong. So the risk, it's harder to get it right the further up you are in the game. But, we saw 2021, the Hungarian Grand Prix, we had a similar situation where basically we had this very slow, extreme wet blue tyre. And then every team boxed on the formation lap because effectively you got a free stop onto the intermediate. Every single car except the pole man, Lewis Hamilton, Mercedes at the time, because it was the hardest call to make. So I think that's the one thing that we need to understand is that, yes, they got it wrong, but they did have the toughest job if you're in the lead. What's really interesting is that they didn't do it with the second car.
That is the human factor. That is this parental papaya rule thing coming in at that point, because they know Oscar's already pissed that he feels he's not getting the same as Lando, and he feels, he's had a rough run. He was having an amazing race. But can you imagine the press today on Monday if they had left him out doing the safe option, Lando had pitted, and Lando would have won the race?
But I think that would have been, if you're not sure,
split the cars.
Split the cars.
So why didn't they? For that reason?
I from the outside, it definitely looks like a thing about,
don't want to offend.
It's one of two reasons. It's either fairness or they were so sure it was the other way around. That's the only two answers. So and they did come out in the press and say, flexibility. And you have to remember that, like, strategists, just like drivers, if you ever meet a strategist that says they've never made any mistakes, they're either lying or it's their third week on the job.
Yeah.
The thing about race strategy is a lot of what we do, we're forged in the fires of the failures and the mistakes that we have made in the past. And you have to remember as a strategist that failure isn't a bad word, and you just don't want to make the same mistake twice.
Well, that's how you get the data, right?
So many mistakes in my time. I've learned from other people, thwalloping me, but that's what makes you better, and that's what makes you, a good person. So I don't think it's cruel to say they made a mistake. I think Mercedes is a great example. 2021, Lewis Hamilton leading the race. They left him out on the grid. He was the only car to take the start. They lost the race result as a result of that. What did they do with both their cars this year? Pox them.
Yeah.
Learning from your failures is part of sport and part of life. And I think, they've got to learn from it. There was a fascinating interview. They said that, like, if we get beaten by Max racing the way that we race, fine, which is super interesting. I guess
Max wouldn't have that viewpoint. Red Bull wouldn't have that viewpoint. I mean, you said it right at the top. Red Bull, they are ruthless.
Yeah.
They have one sole objective. Here's an interesting one. As fast as we realized they'd effed up, how fast, like, Oscar and Lando instantly would have known, right? You sat on that pit wall and you must have, everyone looked at each other. There wasn't a camera angle of that moment, but they must have all been like, has this just gone upside down?
Yeah.
Instantly, right?
The best way that I can say it is, if you're the only car or the only strategist and it's 9-1, you're either about to come in to an absolute winner or you've lost everything. At that point, if you've done something different to the other teams, that this is either going to be a great race day and you're going to be a legend, or it's going to be the other way around. And it's not always that case. I think which is what they've said, their assumption for it being the correct call was that no one else was coming in, they'd have known instantly in this situation. And I think, it's just how you didn't see it coming, that, if I was Red Bull, I would have boxed the car. If I thought there was any chance of being able to use my car pace to extend, you'd have done opposite the McLarens. But I would have assumed they would have split anyway. So I'm coming in anyway, which is the weird thing. So I think, they were always going to come in. And then if you that logic as a competitor, you go, okay, well, if Max is coming in, we need to come in.
Yeah.
So, it's the same thing we said as you go back from the back of the track. If you go, and that's how strategists build their safety car windows, is it's not only what's the fastest thing for me to get from point A to point B, do I take a cheap pit stop, but then, I'm giving up track position, or I'm stretching tires slightly longer, normal race, or, whatever the combination is. But to actually decide whether a window is open or closed, we also need to take into account what other people are doing behind us. Because often you'll look at it and you go, actually, Bob, Sally and, Jojo all need to come in. So now I've suddenly got, even though it doesn't look like I've got a free stop, actually that's why lots of the conversation on a pit wall is about these safety car windows, because you're constantly updating, and someone will suddenly box, and maybe it's a fight that doesn't even have anything to do with you. And you go, so Williams has got really good top speed, and, we're not actually racing them. Maybe they're racing for P14 and I'm racing for P6, but now they're out of my pitting window. Suddenly my safety car window is open. And it's one of the things that, like, it's so annoying. I remember being on a pit wall with a team principal who's now my friend, but very early on in my career. And he was like, why are we always talking about a safety car that doesn't happen? And you're like, well, because we have to, because you always need to be on top of the count. This is one of his first days as a team principal.
Because it is the big disruptor.
Yeah.
So jumping to how good in that moment, proving that women are better at multitasking than men, was Hannah Schmitz. in that moment?
What I think is,
because I don't think enough people know about her.
Yeah, so Hannah is one of the kind of the two main strategists. I think from next year when Will Courtney, who's another great strategist, moves on to McLaren, actually, she'll be inheriting the kind of the top role there. She's great. I'm not biased at all, but she went to the same university as me. She actually didn't cross paths with her because she was a few years older than I was there. But I remember I met her at my interview for Red Bull when I was still at university as a graduate, and it was great to see a woman in that room along with men. And you know what I really enjoy is there was some news articles that were saying how great it is that Hannah is a female. There was a lot more that just said how great is it that this strategist did a good job. And that's the really cool thing, is that, you know, you stop saying female strategist and you start saying strategist, because, you know, I think the peak we had at one point, there was female strategists on the pit wall on 4 of the 6 pit walls, you know, in one of the roles. When there was, Bernie was there as well. There was a girl called Karine in Toro Rosso at the time, and Hannah and myself. And at that point, it's not female strategist or male strategist.
Just great strategists.
It's just great strategists, you know, and that's what I really want to get to, and I think everybody wants to get to. Hannah doesn't want to be the best female strategist because then you're like 6 people have beaten you, so you're pretty rubbish. You know, and nowadays there's even fewer people just currently on the, you know, the way that the rotation is worked. So like, you know, she's not set out there to be the best female. She's set out there to be the best. Yeah. She had the second toughest call, let's say, because you're running in P3, you know, and she nailed it. So yeah,
good job all around.
Snaps for the queen.
I like that. So now they realize they've messed up, and you could hear that communication between Oscar and McLaren, he's, you know, the pit wall, and at this point, you could see Oscar's had the realization this is just not good. And he's like, what do we need to do effectively to the end? The reason I can't wait for Drive to Survive this season is because we hear all the radio transmissions that they're not allowed to play on TV. And you know, there's thousands.
I get to see them all.
You get to see them all. I can't wait. But you know, the drivers are very, very open about what the disaster things are or how great they are. At that moment, what are their options? Extreme pace, pick the next right tire. I mean, there's things and then why didn't Lando go on the soft again and split at the end? So how, in your mind, did they do everything right from that point? McLaren, I'm talking about.
Yes, but I don't think it mattered. It's a bit like that example of the Hungary 2021. You know, I can give you an example where I got it really wrong at the end of a race in Nürburgring 2019. We had, you know, a wet race where, you know, Kvyat boxed and, you know, 8 of us missed it, and he took the slick tire and was able to, you know, get onto the podium in a midfield car, which at the time was crazy. You know, the thing is that when you have these races that are restrictive because it's a hard overtake, and then there's something else that's kind of playing into game, whether it's wet weather that's a great neutralizer of Formula One cars, or this stint length parameter, you are basically going double or triple nothing. You know, the best way to think about these kind of races is in a normal race, you want to drive the first half of the race like you're driving your mother-in-law to dinner and you're a little bit late. So as quickly as you can, but safely. And then the second part of the race, drive as though you need to make a flight and you've got a full rental car cover. You know, but races like this, it changes because there was 2 decision points. It was get it right the first pit stop and the second pit stop. But there's a stint length limit, which means the second pit stop is defined by the first pit stop. So you're actually, the only decision you are making is the first stop, because then you're just watching to see, all eyes on lap 32. We said it before the race, we said it in the race, whether or not you are on the right side or the wrong side. But the die has been cast. You know, basically that first pit stop, the second that you do it, it was done. And you know, I've seen conversations where they did the soft, whether they did the hard, maybe they'd have been a couple of seconds later. But you know, the reality for me is the only reason why they were able to pass on track, it looked like they were able to pass on track, you know, the kind of I think it was, Russell, wasn't it? Was because it was not in Mercedes' interest to race them at that point. They've only got a couple of laps left of their stint. You know, that's exactly the call that I would have done. This isn't, you know, this is just because everyone's selfishly trying to do their best race. And it makes no sense when you're on a new set of tires to destroy your tires racing someone that you know is going to come in 2 laps anyway, and vice versa for them. What was the point in them losing time? They're trying to beat the person at the very end of the race with Carlos. They're Williams trying to race a McLaren. The best thing for Williams to do in that moment is let them through at that point when they're slow anyway, and keep focusing on your race and not losing time there, because you're not racing them at that pit stop around lap 25. I'm racing them at lap 57 and I need every second I can have. I'm going to fight like hell when they're behind me at lap 50. But if I waste my tyre here, I won't have it there. So you see all these tactical decisions. And I think it was the exact same. I think, maybe if they'd fitted a soft and pushed it, they'd have been slightly better. But
Lando might have got another place.
I don't know.
But I think Carlos was very strong. I mean, let's talk about, we get, it's so easy, isn't it? You get hyper-focused on the front of the field. And unless you've got the timing and scoring, you actually can't see the progression of other cars and who's running fast. And on the TV, you don't have that. That's why you need to dual screen it. Carlos, it was an example of his experience, what he's brought to the team. I mean, it really was. He drove an incredibly good race.
Yeah, I think, and the whole of the Williams team needs to be congratulated because, and let's take absolutely nothing away from championship competitors, because the championship has always got a lot of pressure. But when you're in a midfield team, where I've been for a while, you don't get those opportunities every race. At the end of the day, your Landos, your Maxes, your Oscars, pretty much every single race weekend, they have an opportunity to win it. And if they don't win it, they have another chance in 7 days' time. The glory and the failure comes thick and fast, but you always have another chance. When you're in a midfield team, you might not get another chance for a few races. Look at Alpine. They were on the podium last year. This year, you might have to wait 2 years for another go. So to roll the dice in the way that they did, and these were the conversations we were having in Sauber in 2023, sure, we were P10 on the grid, but that meant a lot to us.
Yeah.
And to gamble to throw that away by coming in on lap 7, or lap 3 last year, kudos to them. But, you look at it, who's on their pit wall? James Vowles, strategist, got it wrong in 2021, learned from it. Carlos knows what it's like to lose something that he thought he wasn't going to lose. He's had that beautiful thing about saying that he never thought he'd be back on the podium. Now he's got 2, and I expect we'll see a lot more of them. Every single, and kudos to their strategist is actually quite a new strategist as well in terms of on their pit wall. Just kudos to every single person in that thing, because it takes these, and that's why you get these weird, wacky races. Yes, it's the strategy team that's coming up with the ideas, but they've got to sell it. They've got to convince it. And ultimately, if the guy doesn't come in, the guy doesn't come in. They can fight on the radio and that's done. And, it's a moment of pride, when you can convince your driver to do something that seems slightly counterintuitive. But you're like, just trust me, this is going to work. And yeah, well done to them. I've seen some great edits of Carlos when he's talking about it, and the way that they're all cuddling him. James posted that great thing on Instagram, how it started, how it ended, where he comes in looking all professional and then he's on the ground with champagne in his eye. But I love an underdog story. I'm really, really hoping that we see more Williams podiums next year.
I would like to think we will. They certainly, all the scuttlebuttle is good about them, isn't it?
I love that word. The scuttlebuttle.
I know.
It's scuttling.
So just something, because I think it was super unfair for him and people who've never driven a racing car with Antonelli quite near the end, lap 51 or 52 or something. And, they had projected on TV, I think Alec on the F1 TV had said, it'll be interesting to see, because they're both running, the same engines, whether, if Antonelli makes the pass easy for Lando, and then he gets it sideways on the curb, and obviously Lando goes by. And people online, they slammed him. They gave him such a hard time. And he even made his Instagram black, didn't he? Young Kimi. He's 19 years old. It takes a lot to put a Formula One car sideways deliberately near the end of a race to let someone by. That's bullshit.
Yeah.
He made a mistake. And would he have fought Lando tooth and nail? Probably not. But it was a pass that happened. That's indicative of our social media generation, isn't it? Just the overanalysis, conspiracy theorists.
You know what? 1 in 8 people in the world watch Formula One, and unfortunately, a small percentage of them are not particularly nice people. You wouldn't believe the number of death threats I had in the morning for saying box on lap 7 and lap 32, and I was like, at the end of the race. I was very sassy. Yeah. and I'm old and ugly, and I dealt with it for years, and you have to feel so sorry for someone like Kimi Antonelli that's experiencing something like that on such a huge, greater scale. Completely unfairly, obviously, I work with AWS, and, that's where data is really important to tell the stories. We had the data insight generated that showed very clearly from the telemetry, it was, oversteer, turn 10, he lost 1.07 seconds and he came off. Fact. correct, done. People are allowed to be emotional in the moment, especially if you're a driver driving the car, say what you want to do, but there's absolutely no excuse for like some loser in their like mum's basement being mean to a 19-year-old. Get a life. Go do another sport. Like you're not welcome here. So, and I think what is great is obviously, Mercedes standing by him, everybody in Formula One standing by him. It's just, there's no place for it. This isn't your sport. Like if you don't like it, go away.
Yeah, we don't need you.
We don't need you. We've got enough fans.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. Good. I'm glad you're standing up for him like that. So it's just crazy. We get to the end of the race. We never really thought Oscar was going to catch up. You could see it was a bold challenge. He did the best he can. But Max would dig into his last breath to not give up a win when someone's behind. And that wasn't even close enough. So, Max can respond like he did in Vegas. You pop in a quick, like Oscar did lap. Max goes, all right, do I have to? Gives it a little bit extra. Oscar knows that. Max knows that. They finish. Max crosses the line. Oscar second, then obviously Carlos third. At that point, I thought to myself when I saw Oscar's, just utter dejection standing there. But you got to remember, these are young men. You're talking about an F1 World Championship, potentially, in his hands. And he had to drive for, 45 laps of horror in his mind, knowing his team had let him down again. But that level of professionalism, I've got to say, is very impressive from all of them, but especially him. Yeah. And, he still, as he said, maybe one of my best races, but it just, was all for naught.
Yeah.
Talk about it from his point of view, ending that race.
I think you absolutely nailed it there. Obviously we're in the entertainment business, right? You're allowed to have your favorites when you're a fan, but the reality is, having spent 15 years in the paddock, these are all really nice human beings. They're good people, they're hardworking, they're just out there, trying to, change their life, change their family's life, and a passion they've been working at since they're 3 or 4 years old, realistically. Oscar nailed it. He did not put a foot wrong. He drove the wheels off the thing all weekend. Unfortunately, this too is sport, which is sometimes you can do absolutely everything right as a driver, as an engineer, as a strategist, and you don't win. I think, experience is what you get when you don't get what you wanted. And if he doesn't walk away from this year with the championship crown, he's got a lot of experience. And I think it would be folly to bet against Oscar not, having Oscar Piastri world champion against his name, whether it's this year, maybe not, but he's going to win a championship. I expect he's probably going to win more than one championship. He's a good guy with great people around him. His mum's a legend, first off. Yeah. His partner's great. And the people around him is great. So if he doesn't win this one, he'll just come back stronger.
Yeah. I think it was very interesting it was a good reminder of, you just said it, and I was reading it yesterday, and they were talking about it on various podcasts as well. What we got to remember is every single person there, you say they're human. Yes, they are. It's a very human sport, but every one of them has had an immense amount of sacrifice from family, friends. They've given up a lot. They've gained a lot. Obviously, you get to Formula One. No one's feeling sorry for your sacrifice. You've done incredibly well. But it's the mums, the dads, the brothers, the sisters who didn't get the attention, the managers. In that moment, it's a team dejection, right? Your personal team dejection. And it was no surprise that the accounts of Mark Webber glaring at Zach Brown walking past and Stella. Of course he's going to. His boy is...
Yeah,
they're losing the championship 2 weekends in a row,
and that's your responsibility too. Yeah. I've gone and apologized or congratulated with the managers of my drivers. Joe's managed by Mark Hines, who now was with Lewis, is now back with Lewis, and it is your responsibility. Graham Loudon's manager, if you get it wrong, you go to their manager as part of your post-race, procedures, or post-qualifying or post-sprint, and you give them the time of day and you explain to them, you say, this is, hopefully you've explained to them before the race why we're doing what we're doing, but at the end of the race, if you got it wrong, you just say, I'm sorry. And again, most of them are good people. And if, it's an integral of your performance, if you're just really bad and you get it wrong every week, they might not like you. But if like in 24 races a year, you get it wrong 3 times, probably their drivers got it wrong more than 3 times. And actually you're a team, the Eagles are on 9-3 and they're like favorites for the Super Bowl, like it doesn't, you don't need to win everything to be a champion.
But there is something, as a driver, I think it stands you in good stead for the whole of your life. Whatever they go on to, after Formula One business and stuff. And even drivers like myself, obviously not in Formula One, but there's certain lessons that you learn from racing that carry you through life very well. And that is taking responsibility. Because when you come in and a wheel's hanging off, it's no one else's fault. I always feel sorry for the wheel guys, because they are the ones who you can see who screwed it up. Whereas everyone else is in a race team, it's to the outside, it's a little bit like, well, it was them, and everyone, we know in the team exactly who it is.
Yeah.
But it's a collective team failure. McLaren are taking on the shoulders the plank decision. We don't know which poor sod actually did the final adjustments on ride heights, right? We don't know which member of the team. They all do. But collectively, it's a failure. The driver has to take it right on the chin when you spin and when you smack it in the wall. There's no one else to blame. So I find that is really good, as drivers tend to be very honest through the rest of their life about taking it on, like if you make a bad strategy call, but you could also be blaming the information that came your way.
But not good strategist. Like the most important word is sorry.
Sorry.
If you get it wrong,
admit it.
Before you say anything else in the debrief, I was taught, again, the great Rory Byrne, it was taught by Ross Brawn, just don't say anything other than the word sorry to lead.
And move on.
Go, sorry for the race, I got this wrong and I got wrong. Right, now this is why we did it. But leading with the word sorry disarms everybody. And if you expect your driver to come in and say sorry when they made a mistake, you have to do it. And also, like, if you don't, you don't like the fire, get out of the kitchen.
Exactly.
If you don't want to roll like that, there's plenty of other roles, But
what about two in a row? That's the trouble. Right, McLaren going into the 3rd race, everybody must be jittery. That's what I'm thinking, right?
There's an adage that, like, as a strategist, you get, if you do 2 in a row, you're okay. If you do 3 in a row, start updating your CV.
Yeah.
So which is like, don't. And every one race you get wrong, you need 5 good ones to offset. So, but that's what makes a great strategist. It's what makes a great, a great driver, is to decompartmentalize. And it's the toughest thing in the world, right? If you've got done on an undercut and then the next race is an overcut race and you're there going, okay, guys, so we're going to do the overcut again, but I promise this week it's going to work.
It's not
that's part of the job and the fun of it is the getting the other.
To lose one parent is misfortune. To lose 2 is carelessness. That was Winnie the Pooh, I think. Okay, so what does Lando have to do to win the championship? Statistically, philosophically,
top 3. Top 3. For me, like, 3-way decider. I think we'll go to the history books because I love a little bit of history books. Let's go back to 2010. 3-way decider. Last time we had one, we had Fernando, we had Webber, who's now Oscar's manager, and we had Seb Vettel going into the final race. Ferrari got the strategy wrong. I think they say that. They boxed Fernando. He got caught behind Vitaly Petrov, Andrea Stella, who's now the team principal at McLaren, goes, use the full extent of your talent to overtake him. It wasn't talent. It was just top speed. Obviously, we didn't have DRS back then. And they lose the championship to the bloke that came in 3rd. Go back to 2007, we've got a McLaren team battle where the McLarens are facing each other. Fernando Alonso, Lewis Hamilton, they've got the fastest car. They've already lost all their points in the Constructors' Championship. And a young man named Kimi Räikkönen comes through to take it all. He was in 3rd. So I think going into the race, all 3 of them have just got to have the championship mentality of, I just need to win this race. If you win the race, you've done everything you can do. If I'm Oscar, I'd be like, right, I'm going to watch the 2010 championship finale, remind myself as the bloke in P3 that won, because the number 1 and number 2 are racing each other and they're going to take each other out or going to block each other as a part of the race game. That's the same thing that happened in 2007. So I'd be like, right, okay, last 2 times this has happened, it's gone to the bloke in 3rd. I just need to win this race, and then that's all I can do. And if that's it, I've learned. And then if you're Lando, you say, well, like a bit of an Abu Dhabi specialist, obviously he's done very well there. I don't think the dominance is going to translate exactly the same this year, but you go, just need to win this race. And, if you're Max, you just wake up and win races. So, I love it because I think there's, it's one of those really cool moments where by being defensive, you're actually, you're taking on more risk. The best way to win the championship is just to win the race. And
Yeah.
all three of them are just going to want to win the race. And then I think the only other dynamic is obviously Red Bull exist to help Max win the championship. You know, Yuki Tsunoda just announced today he's going to be the reserve driver next year as Hadjar's getting the call up. But his job on Sunday is to help Max win the championship.
And if he does what he did in Qatar, he was qualified Max. Well, I mean, I haven't thought I would ever say those words on this show, but he did. And he did what he did. Let him by, do his thing. I mean,
so they've got their 2 against 1, like minimum. Then the other one is, what did McLaren do? Do they race both of them, or do they put absolutely everything behind Lando? And at what point in the race weekend?
At what point in the race? I was going to say, in their strategy.
Because you could make it before qualifying as well. Do you make that call? And then the only other thing that I love about the last race of the season is race 1, and the final race is special because you don't know what, so many of the parameters going to race 1. The final race, we get lots of weird effects in racing that you have to model as a strategist and understand as a driver, where you have this nuance where you have cars that have everything to lose and you have people with nothing to lose. You have teams, Williams, great example. They're locked in P5 in the championship. No matter, even if they came P1, P2 or last, double DNF, they're P5 in the championship.
Okay.
Can't change. So they've got absolutely nothing to lose.
Have a great race.
Go for it. You know, we've got championship battles. You've got drivers out of contract. You've got a driver like Yuki Tsunoda, for example, that's effectively driving for his career right now in terms of it's his last show for it. You know, and you get these weird effects. I always called it the Seb 2012 effect because we got beaten by Seb again, final race of the season when we were at Ferrari, where lap 1, safety cars at the back. We're like, we've got this championship. He just needs to get to P5. We can do this. For 5 laps, we did win, but we couldn't understand why he was making his way through the field so quickly. Like none of the projections made any sense. It was a bit when Michael Schumacher came on the radio and said from one German champion to the next. And it's this weird effect where in the final race, you get even more extreme what we saw in Qatar, where people won't race you. They will jump out of the way because why would you risk a DNF?
Yeah, why would you?
Or if it's your best mate that you're playing padel with on Monday and you can give him a world championship.
And it makes no effect to you.
And it makes no effect to you.
No.
You know, so it's...
and what goes around does come around in our sport.
It's so interesting. So like watch out for it. And if you see any like weird, you know, nuances, know that this is the heart of racing and we've had this from the beginning of time in Formula One. And it's one of the things that makes modelling a race that on paper looks, you know, not particularly difficult. You know, so we've got a very low volatility. I'm not talking about 2021, but normally Abu Dhabi is a real like standard race. You know, you've got a bit of everything. You've got kind of big overtakes, 1 and 6. You've got sector 3 that's very technical, big, nice wide runoffs. Like it's not a spicy track, but it's the nuance of it being the last race of the season that makes it spice.
My last question to you. Oscar's in 2nd, Lando's in 4th. Would you want to make that radio call?
I'd make it.
You'd make it and say, I mean, a championship, it's a championship, right?
Yeah.
You got to swap them.
I'd make it.
And I think the drivers know that. I mean, again, in their briefing, they will go through every one of those options.
Yeah, because I think, you know, as a team, you exist to win championships. You know, again, I'm probably biased because I was raised in the crucible of Ferrari, where Ferrari is the only team that exists to win the Drivers' Championship. They care very publicly. You know, that's the one that they really want. And so I think, you know, if there was an opportunity to do that, you would have to do it. It's part of your responsibility. Sometimes you have to do things you don't like, or don't make you feel like a good person, but the right thing to do, because it's not just the 2 people on track, it's the 1,000 people back at the factory and they're there that, you know, they deserve a drivers' championship too. And sometimes you have to do the hard things, but I hope if they're in that position, they make it, because it would be a nice way to finish it. But, you know, I think whoever wins this championship, you know, especially when you look at what Max has done with the car that he's been given, is going to be a worthy champion. You know, if Max wins it, it'll be the greatest comeback in F1 history of all time. You know, and with Lando and with Oscar, you know, it's their first championship. You know, so it's always going to be special. So, yeah, I think whoever wins it will be a really cool day for the sport.
I am so jealous. You're going to be there this weekend. I have a feeling that you don't have bias, but you have favorites. You can't be a fat passionate about Formula One without having scenarios that you wish to go your way. I think I'm going to be watching your face closely on TV as this weekend unfolds, because it's going to be written all over it, isn't it?
It is going to be, and you have to remember, like, you know, a lot of us in Formula One, like we've genuinely known all 3 of those since they were kids. You know, I remember, like, you know, kind of known all of them since they were like, you know, GP2, F2, you know, and it's amazing to see them be crowned a champion.
Yeah. Ruth, have a wonderful time. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
being. It'll be next season before we're back.
I know,
here.
but it'll be here soon enough. We can't even start on 26. We'll have to deal with that as another podcast. There's too much to talk about already.
Well, enjoy this weekend.
Thank you so
much. Well, I can't wait for this weekend, especially to watch what she's going to be up to all weekend. I think we're in for one of those moments where we're either going to have a business case study on how Max comes back from the biggest deficit ever to win a championship, or a case study on how McLaren threw it all away in the last half of a year. Either way, it's a genius situation and one that makes Formula One so compelling. Guys, I can't wait to be joining you next week with whatever the tale of the weekend is. Enjoy it. Thanks to Ruth. Thanks to The Wynn, obviously, for having us here. And SiriusXM. See you next week.